The conference was finally over, and a wave of exhaustion washed over me as I trudged through the lobby of the Fairmont Royal York in Toronto. It was a grand hotel, steeped in history, the kind of place that felt both luxurious and a little impersonal. All I wanted was a hot shower and a silent night. I checked in, received my keycard for room 312, and rode the ornate elevator to the third floor. The hallway was long and dimly lit, the thick carpet muffling the sound of my rolling suitcase. Room 312 was near the end of the corridor, and as I swiped my card and pushed open the door, a wave of stale, slightly musty air greeted me. The room was standard fare: 2 double beds, a desk, a television bolted to the wall, and a surprisingly large window overlooking the bustling street below. I tossed my suitcase onto one of the beds and stretched, the tension in my shoulders finally starting to ease. I showered, changed into my evening wear, and ordered a late-night snack from room service. While I waited, I scrolled through my phone, catching up on emails. The food arrived quickly, and I ate it sitting at the desk, watching a mindless late-night talk show. It was around 1:30 a.m. when I finally turned off the lights and slid under the covers. The city sounds drifted up from below, a low hum of traffic and the occasional siren. It wasn't silent, but it was a familiar kind of noise, the white noise of urban life that usually helped me sleep. A soft, hesitant knock on my door made me almost leap out of bed. My heart skipped a beat. Who could be knocking at this hour? I hadn't ordered anything else, and I wasn't expecting any calls. I held my breath, listening. The city sounds seemed to fade away, leaving only the pounding of my own heart in my ears. Silence. Maybe it was someone knocking on someone else's door, I thought, trying to rationalize the sound. Or perhaps someone had mistakenly knocked on the wrong door. I closed my eyes, willing myself to relax. Just as I was starting to drift off, it happened again. Knock, knock. This time, it was slightly louder, more insistent. I sat up in bed, my senses on high alert. "Hello?" I called out, my voice a little shaky in the darkness. No response. Just eerie silence. I debated whether to get up and look through the peephole. Part of me was terrified of what I might see, or not see. Another part of me was annoyed and wanted to tell whoever was knocking to go away. Finally, curiosity, or perhaps a foolish sense of bravery, won out. I cautiously swung my legs out of bed and padded over to the door. I peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty. The dim lights cast long shadows, but there was no one there. I frowned, a shiver running down my spine. Maybe it was someone playing a prank, but the hotel seemed so quiet. I went back to bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me in an unfamiliar environment. But sleep eluded me. Every creak of the building, every distant siren made me jump. I kept expecting to hear another knock. And then it came. This time, it wasn't on the door. It was on the wall beside my bed, the wall that presumably separated my room from the next. Tap, tap, tap. It was slow, menacing, almost like someone was gently knocking with their knuckles. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice louder this time, tinged with a growing unease. The tapping stopped. I held my breath, listening intently. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant city sounds. Just when I started to think it was over, the tapping began again. Tap, tap, tap. It continued for what felt like an eternity. A slow, steady rhythm that was both unnerving and strangely insistent. I got out of bed again, my heart pounding, and pressed my ear against the wall. The tapping seemed to be coming from directly behind the headboard. I tried banging on the wall myself, hoping to startle whoever was doing it, or at least let them know they were disturbing me. I banged several times, hard. The tapping on the other side stopped immediately. I waited, listening. Silence. I thought maybe I had finally scared them off. I went back to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. My mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe there was a plumbing issue in the wall, or some kind of electrical wiring causing the sound. Just as I was starting to relax, the tapping began again. Tap. 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 This time, it was different. It wasn't a steady rhythm. It was more erratic, almost frantic. Tap, 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 tap. My fear intensified. This didn't feel like someone just messing around anymore. There was a strange urgency to the sound. I sat up in bed, my eyes wide in the darkness. I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine. What if there wasn't anyone in the next room? The hotel had seemed so empty. The tapping continued, growing louder, more insistent. It felt like it was inside my head, a relentless, maddening rhythm. Suddenly, the knocking started on the door again, this time much more forceful. Bang, bang, bang! I screamed, a choked sound that was swallowed by the silence of the room. I scrambled out of bed and backed away from the door, my eyes fixed on the handle. Bang! 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 The door rattled in its frame. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Who was doing this? What did they want? I rushed to the nightstand and fumbled for the landline, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. I began frantically searching for the front desk button. Just as I was about to press it, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, more terrifying than the noise had been. I stood there, frozen, listening for any sound. Nothing. I slowly lowered the phone, my hand still trembling. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the front desk? Should I open the door? Should I just try to ignore it and go back to bed? The thought of going back to bed was unbearable. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, terribly wrong. After a few minutes of agonizing indecision, I decided to call the front desk. My voice was shaky as I explained what had happened, the knocking on the door and the wall. The person on the other end of the line sounded sleepy and slightly annoyed. They assured me they would send someone up to check. I waited, huddled on the edge of the bed, every nerve in my body on edge. It felt like hours passed before I heard a faint knock on my door. I cautiously went to the peephole and saw a hotel staff member standing in the hallway. I opened the door, my heart still pounding. I explained everything again, my voice still trembling. The staff member listened patiently, his expression neutral. He checked the hallway, knocked on the door of the adjoining room, and listened at the wall. "I don't hear anything now, sir," he said, his tone polite, but slightly dismissive. Perhaps it was just some rowdy guests in the next room. I wanted to argue, to tell him about the menacing rhythm of the tapping, the insistent banging on my door, the feeling of dread that had washed over me. But I just nodded, feeling foolish and slightly hysterical. The staff member offered to stay for a few minutes to make sure everything was okay. But after a few minutes of silence, he left, assuring me to call again if I heard anything else. I locked the door and leaned against it, my body trembling. I didn't feel any safer. I knew what I had heard. I knew what I had felt. It wasn't just rowdy guests. I didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night. Every shadow in the room seemed to hold a threat. Every creak of the building made me jump. I kept expecting to hear the knocking again, the tapping on the wall. As soon as the first light of dawn crept through the window, I packed my bags, my movements hurried and frantic. I checked out of the Fairmont Royal York as quickly as possible, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere of room 312. I never found out who or what was knocking that night. The hotel staff offered no explanation, and the memory remains a chilling reminder of the vulnerability you feel when you're alone in an unfamiliar place. The unsettling feeling that you might not be as alone as you think. To this day, anytime I check into a hotel, I remember the fear that gripped me in room 312, the relentless knocking that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once.
The Grandview Hotel had a certain faded elegance, a grandeur that hinted at a more prosperous past. I'd booked a room for a week, needing a quiet place to focus on finishing my manuscript. Room 417 was on the 4th floor, overlooking a rather dreary alleyway. But the room itself was spacious and seemed clean enough. I didn't expect luxury, just solitude. What I found was something far more unsettling. The first night was uneventful. I unpacked, ordered room service, and worked late into the night. It was quiet, almost eerily so, but I chalked it up to the hotel being mostly empty during the off-season. The next day, however, things started to feel off. It began with the television. I'd turn it off before leaving for a walk, only to find it on when I returned, tuned to static. I dismissed it as a glitch, a faulty remote, or a jumpy signal. But it happened again the next day and the day after that. Each time the same static-filled screen greeted me. Then came the sounds. Late at night, after I'd turned off the lights and was drifting towards sleep, I'd hear them, faint whispers coming from the adjoining wall. I couldn't make out any words, just a low murmuring sound like multiple voices speaking in hushed tones. I pressed my ear against the wall, straining to understand, but it remained an unintelligible murmur, both present and just out of reach. I considered complaining to the front desk, thinking the next room was occupied by a group of inconsiderate guests, but during the day, the hotel seemed deserted. I rarely saw another soul in the hallways. The silence in the hotel was also unnerving. Sometimes in the middle of the day, a heavy, oppressive silence would descend, swallowing all the usual hotel sounds. The distant hum of the elevator, the muffled voices from other rooms, the clatter of housekeeping carts. It would be so profound it felt like my ears were blocked, leaving me in a strange, soundless void. It was during these moments of intense silence that I felt the most uneasy. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The feeling of being watched from somewhere unseen. One afternoon, I returned to my room to find my belongings slightly rearranged. My laptop, which I'd left on the desk, was now on the bedside table. A book I'd placed on the nightstand was now open on the floor. I was certain I hadn't moved them. My initial thought was that housekeeping had come while I was out, but the room hadn't been cleaned, the bed was still unmade, and the wastebasket was still full. A cold knot of unease tightened in my stomach. That night, the whispers from the adjoining room were louder, more insistent. I could almost make out individual voices now, though the words remained just beyond comprehension. Mixed with the whispers was a faint rhythmic tapping coming from the wall above my bed. Tap, tap, tap. It was slow and deliberate, each tap echoing in the otherwise silent room, a persistent, unsettling rhythm that kept me awake for hours. Sleep finally came, but it was fitful and filled with strange, unsettling dreams. I dreamt of long, empty corridors, of doors that opened into darkness, of faint whispers just beyond my hearing. I woke up feeling drained and anxious, the oppressive atmosphere of the room weighing heavily on me. The next day, I decided to explore the hotel a bit. The lobby was grand but deserted, the once plush furniture showing signs of age and neglect. The hallways on the other floors were eerily silent, the doors to the rooms closed and still. It felt like the hotel was holding its breath, waiting for something. As I wandered down the third floor, I noticed a peculiar smell, a faint metallic odor, like old blood. It seemed to be strongest near one particular room, room 317. I hesitated, a strange curiosity mixed with a growing sense of dread, but I didn't dare linger. Back in my room that evening, the activity escalated. The television flickered on and off on its own. The whispers from the adjoining room were almost frantic now, a cacophony of hushed voices that seemed to be arguing or pleading. The tapping from above became more insistent, more erratic. Sometimes a slow, deliberate rhythm, other times a rapid, frantic drumming. Then the doorknob to my room began to rattle. Slowly, deliberately, it turned. My heart leaped into my throat. I held my breath, paralyzed with fear, staring at the door. It creaked open a fraction of an inch, revealing a sliver of the dark hallway beyond. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The knob remained still, the door slightly ajar. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity, my senses on high alert. Finally, I crept towards the door and peered out into the hallway. It was empty, the only sound the faint hum of the distant elevator. I closed and locked the door, my hands shaking. That night was the worst. The whispers from the adjoining room intensified, becoming almost screams, though still muffled by the wall. The tapping from above was relentless, a constant barrage that vibrated through the ceiling. And then, a new sound joined the chorus. A faint scratching sound coming from inside the walls of my own room, like tiny claws scraping against the plaster. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to block out the terrifying symphony of unseen activity. But it was no use. The sounds seemed to be coming from everywhere, closing in on me, suffocating me with their unseen presence. I felt a cold spot form beside me in the bed, a distinct drop in temperature, as if something had just materialized there. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears streaming down my face, praying for the night to end. The next morning, I checked out of the Grandview hotel, cutting my stay short. I didn't bother explaining to the bewildered clerk at the front desk. I just needed to get out, to escape the oppressive atmosphere, the unsettling silence, the terrifying whispers and taps of room 417. I never finished my manuscript there. And to this day, whenever I stay in a hotel, I always check the adjoining rooms. And I always listen for the slightest sound from the walls. The memory of room 417, and whatever unseen presence resided within its walls, still sends a shiver down my spine. It taught me that sometimes, the most terrifying hauntings aren't confined to old mansions or specific locations. Sometimes, they can be found in the most ordinary of places, waiting in the silence of a forgotten hotel room, ready to whisper their secrets to anyone who dares to listen.